Hi, Saul Muerte here, continuing our exploration of Dennis Wheatley's Library of the Occult. Tonight, as part of a double header with Gaston Leroux's The Phantom of the Opera, we turn to perhaps the single most iconic Gothic novel ever written, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. This is more than a tale of horror, it's a story that redefined literature, created entire genres, and continues to haunt our cultural imagination over 200 years later. But before we step into the icy landscapes of Victor Frankenstein and his nameless creature, we need to know the extraordinary young woman who gave birth to this story. Mary Shelley, born Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin in 1797, was no ordinary writer. She was the daughter of two intellectual titans, William Godwin, the radical philosopher and political theorist, and Mary Wollstonecraft, the pioneering feminist author of Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Mary Wollstonecraft died shortly after giving birth, so the young Mary grew up in the shadow of a mother she never knew, but whose ideas about education, freedom, and equality permeated her household. Her father raised her in a literary environment, surrounded by poets, thinkers, and radicals. At 16, she fell in love with the poet Percy Shelley, a brilliant but scandalous figure who was already married at the time. Together they eloped, embarking on a tumultuous life filled with tragedy, travel, and creativity. It was during one of these infamous summers in 1816 at Lake Geneva, alongside Percy, Lord Byron, and John Polidori, that Frankenstein was born. The group amused themselves by reading ghost stories aloud until Byron proposed a challenge. Each should write one of their own. Out of that storm-lashed holiday came Polidori's The Vampire, precursor to the modern vampire fiction, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and she was just 18 years old at the time. The idea came to her in what she described as a waking dream. In her words, I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing that he had put together, and saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then on the working of some powerful engine show signs of life. That vision became the cornerstone of the novel. Frankenstein itself was published anonymously in 1818, with a revised edition in 1831 under Mary's name. The novel unfolds as a series of framed narratives. At the outer layer we have Robert Walton, an Arctic explorer writing letters to his sister. Within his account is Victor Frankenstein's confession, and within that is the voice of the creature himself. A Russian dole of testimonies that keeps the reader questioning truth and moral responsibility. Victor Frankenstein, a brilliant but arrogant scientist, discovers the secret of reanimating life. He assembles a body from corpses and brings it to life. But when the creature opens its eyes, Victor recoils in horror and abandons him. The being, left to fend for himself, learns language, morality, and history by observing humans, but he also experiences rejection, cruelty, and violence. Lonely and embittered, he confronts Victor, demanding a companion. Victor refuses, and the creature's grief curdles into vengeance. Their fates are entwined in a tragic chase across Europe to the frozen wastes of the North Pole, where Victor dies and the creature, overcome with sorrow, vows to end his own life. So why does the novel endure? Well, let's take a deeper dive. At its core is the question of what it means to create, and what responsibility the creator has to their creation. Victor Frankenstein embodies Promethean hubris, stealing the fire of life itself. But unlike Prometheus, he shirks the consequences, he flees his own work. Cheryl's moral is clear: invention without responsibility is monstrous. This resonates today with debates around artificial intelligence, cloning, and genetic engineering. Every age has its Frankenstein moment, when technological breakthrough raises the question, just because we can, does it mean we should? Shelley destabilizes the concept of the monster. The creature commits terrible acts, but he is also eloquent, sensitive, and deeply wronged. He says, I ought to be thy Adam, but I'm rather the fallen angel. This line, with its echo of Milton's Paradise Lost, captures this tragedy. He longs to be loved, but is cast out, like Satan, into isolation. In giving the monster a voice, Shelley forces us to confront the humanity of the outsider, an idea far ahead of its time. The novel sits at the crossroads of enlightenment, rationality, and romantic doubt. Victor's scientific ambition is juxtaposed with sublime natural landscapes, mountains, storms, glaciers, which reminds us of nature's vastness and human limitation. The Gothic atmosphere makes science itself feel occult, a kind of forbidden magic. Both Victor and his creature are defined by isolation. Victor isolates himself in his obsessive work, neglecting family and friends. The creature is isolated by his deformity, denied even the simplest companionship. For Shelley, isolation is the crucible of despair and destruction. There's also a radical undercurrent about gender. Shelley, daughter of a feminist, creates a story where male creation replaces female reproduction. Victor usurps the act of birth, but the result is horror. Female characters like Elizabeth and Justine are marginalised, silenced, or sacrificed. The absence of maternal nurturing is part of what makes Frankenstein's experiment a catastrophe. The message, creation without care, without empathy, leads to ruin. By layering voices, Wharton, Victor, the creature, Shelley refuses a single authoritative account. Instead, she makes the reader the judge. Whose story do we believe? Who is guilty? Who is innocent? It's a narrative puzzle that gives the novel its enduring power. Frankenstein is often called the first true science fiction novel. While also being a masterpiece of Gothic literature, it gave us the archetype of the mad scientist, the sympathetic monster, and the moral fable of hubris punished. Its adaptations are legion. Stage versions appeared almost immediately after publication. The 1931 University Pictures film with Boris Karloff as the monster cemented the image of the flat-headed creature with bolts in his neck, an invention of cinema, not Mary Shelley. Hammer Studios later reimagined it with Peter Cushing, bringing a darker, bloodier edge. Countless retellings from comic books to theatre testify to the story's elasticity. But at its core, every adaptation returns to Shelley's questions. What do we owe to what we create? And how do we treat those who are different? Among the esoteric and mystical works within Dennis Wheatley's Library of the Occult, Frankenstein stands out. Here, the occult is not ritual magic, but science itself, the hidden, dangerous art of reanimation. Mary Shelley shows us that the boundary between science and sorcery is porous. Both can produce wonders, but can unleash terrors. Pairing this with Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera, we see two sides of the Gothic outsider. Eric, the masked genius of the opera house, and the creature, the nameless child of science. Both long for love, both are rejected, both become figures of tragedy. Together, they remind us that the monsters who haunt our imagination are often reflections of our own fears, our desires, and our failings. Mary Shelley was just a teenager when she dreamt this story, yet out of grief, loss, and imagination, she created something immortal. A novel that speaks across centuries to questions of science, society, and the soul. Frankenstein is not just a Gothic tale. It's a mirror held up to humanity, asking us to look at the things we make and to ask whether we will embrace them or abandon them. Over 200 years later, the creature still walks among us in every debate about technology, in every outsider we fail to see as human, in every shadow where creation outpaces responsibility. Thanks for joining me in the Library of the Occult. Until next time, I'm your host, Saul Muerte.